Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here back in California and also to be in a university. It's been quite a while since I've been on a campus. So before I tell you a little bit more about myself and what has brought me here today, I wanted to ask or do a little quiz here. So who of you knows who Patti Smith is? Can I see a show of hands? One. Oh, goodness, I'm dating myself.
Maybe you should say the musician Patti Smith.
The musician. Does that help? The musician Patti Smith? Oh, you guys are going to have to go Google after this. Well, Patti Smith is a rock and roll Hall of Famer. She has been formative for people like Madonna, REM, and many others. You're looking at me like, why are you talking about this woman? I'm going to get to that. So this past year, Patti Smith was asked to sing at the Nobel Prize ceremonies in Sweden. Patti Smith has given I don't know how many concerts, but countless. The fact that she's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would indicate she knows what she's doing. She goes to Sweden, she prepares her song. She's going to sing Bob Dylan because Bob Dylan has won the Nobel Prize this year. And she does the rehearsal on the morning of the event. Everything goes smoothly with the whole orchestra. And then she gets to the event and she starts singing, and suddenly she has this sense of dread that comes over her, these nerves. And she says, I'm going to read you her quote, "I was struck with such a plethora of emotions that I was unable to negotiate them. Unaccustomed to such an overwhelming case of nerves, I was unable to continue." So she choked. She suddenly couldn't go on with the song. And what was interesting is she stopped and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I feel so nervous." And instead of everybody kind of, chatting and going, "Oh, brother," people started clapping louder than you could imagine. And there was this overwhelming show of support. Keep in mind that Patti Smith is singing to the King and Queen of Sweden. She's singing to the world's Nobel laureates. So, an applaud and some encouragement really helps. Why do I care about this? Why should you care about this? Well, I watched it on YouTube later, and I thought, God, if Patti Smith can mess up and keep going and use this as an experience to learn something, then certainly I can, certainly you can. And it reminded me of the work that I've been doing on transformative resilience and our ability to not just bounce back, but to spring forward and to grow from difficult things. And what's interesting is that after the event, Patti Smith was talking to some of these Nobel scientists, and she said, "I'm so sorry, I really wanted to give a flawless performance." And in response, they said, no, none of us would have wished for that. For us, your performance seemed like a metaphor for the struggle that so many of us face. So that brings me to transformative resilience. We're going to talk about what it is. But I also was asked to talk about my own experience as an entrepreneur and what brought me here today. So I started out my career working for a number of nonprofits on a range of social issues. I lived with the world's poorest people in countries like India and Cambodia in small villages. And I also met with and worked for some of the world's most powerful leaders, including having worked for people like Mary Robinson after she was president of Ireland. And worked in villages in India where people were, women in particular, were learning how to build solar lanterns. So I had this vast range of experiences. And yet what I found working in the NGOs, in the UN, was that I had outgrown the roles. I felt like I was a square peg trying to be fit into a round hole. And it was time for me to go out on my own and to make a difference in my own way. So I started my own business in the end of 2011. And keep in mind, I was living in the UK, which means that I needed a work permit, which I would keep renewing to be able to stay in the country. And I had all my calculations all figured out. And then as soon as I went out on my own, the UK government changed the requirements for me to stay in the country by £10,000 from one day to the next. They just announced it. So I'm like this, at night doing calculations of how many days I need to do consulting work, at what rate, when I need to get paid by. I have two major projects. One is for the United Nations, the other is for a big international charity. And really the task is to solve one of the world's biggest problems for which somebody should get a Nobel Prize, on a shoestring budget, on a tight schedule. How do we create sustainable development in the world among all the world's governments? So I'm feeling a little bit stressed. Then I get a phone call from Thailand where my father lives, and he's been in a horrible accident. Without many other choices, he has opted to have his leg amputated. So here I am in the midst of building this business, in the midst of immense stress, and I fly across the world to go be there in the hospital with my father. And there was this moment in which my dad was on pain medication and was a little bit disoriented, and he tried to step out of bed. And I had to grab him and hold him because he was going to fall if I didn't. And I had tears streaming down my face. It makes me sad just thinking about it now. And I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And, it was not one thing. It was this mounting pressure of all of these different things that I was trying to do. Needless to say, a few weeks later, it just was too much. And I ended up having a really bad back injury, which I think was the result of all of this stress. I'm somebody who's used to waking up in the morning and being like, okay, so what are we doing today? And all I could do was wake up and go, okay, so we're going to watch the sun move across the wall on that, that wall outside my window. And for a few months, I just had to kind of be patient. I had to trust that things would change, but I also had to think about what I needed to do differently. Keep in mind, this was the time in my life I was supposed to be out in the world, and instead, I could barely walk a block. I was kind of going around the block like this, listening to Snoop Dogg, going, oh yeah, I've still got it, right? It didn't feel like it. So, as I said, with all sorts of swimming and rehabilitation, I finally got my strength back. But through that process, I had actually changed quite a bit. And instead of feeling that I had to go out and single-handedly change the world in every country I could get my hands on, I realized what I really needed to do was build my own skills and to build my own strength, my own resilience, and then use that and take that out into the world, that I couldn't really have an impact if I wasn't in a different place myself. And that perhaps what I could do was to also help other people build their strength. Because so many of the people that I had met in the halls of the United Nations, out in developing countries that were creating change, in many respects weren't living very sustainable lives. So this set me on a different path of what was important to me and what I wanted my business to be about. And it led me to start researching and co-writing this book on transformative resilience, and to start gearing the services that I provided in that direction. I won't tell you about the specifics of projects and what have you because I want to move on, but please feel free to ask questions later, including about what kind of Snoop Dogg I was listening to. Okay. So this is just a little bit of a visual, though, about the way I've set up my business, and it continues to evolve. It's really about creating inclusive and resilient economies, empowered women and resilient individuals, and inclusive and resilient businesses. And we do work in a number of ways, from thought leadership to leadership development, strategy, and analysis. And it's taken me a while to get to this, to be able to visualize it. I'm particularly proud of this visual, which is part of why it's up here, but it also gives you a sense of what I do. Let's talk about you, though, now. So I want to talk about what's making you stressed. And it's probably more than one thing, and I hope that you won't be shy here. So in the past 2 weeks, who has been stressed about something in their personal life? A relationship, paying your bills. Don't be shy. Yeah, me too. Okay, so I would say that was maybe 60% of the room. Who of you has been stressed about something to do with your studies, getting your assignments done, or a job that you have outside of work? Okay, the hands are going up even more. I'd say that's about maybe 70% of the room. Which of you, or how many of you, are worried about what's happening in the world, what's happening in our country after this election? Okay, that was fairly laid back for some of you, considering what's going on. And then, how many of you guys are worried about the social tensions or yourself have experienced some kind of prejudice, in these past couple of weeks? The isms and the phobias, sexism, racism, homophobia. Okay, that's a harder one to also be able to, talk about and sometimes identify. So why am I asking you this? The point is that all of us have stresses and strains and challenges and failures in our personal lives, also in our work lives, but additionally, we feel the pressure of these big global or national trends that become personal very quickly for us. So I live in the UK, there just was Brexit. Does everybody know what Brexit is? Friends of mine are freaking out quite quickly. It was like, okay, I'm Italian, I'm married to a British guy, our child is British, am I allowed to stay in the country? So it's global, but it becomes personal very quickly. For entrepreneurs, I would say there are some additional challenges, and I don't want to be a downer because there are also all sorts of amazing things. One of them is long hours, pressure to be creative, to have the next big idea, funding, scaling up, uncertainty. And there are also the biases that we feel in society already show up in entrepreneurship. So it's much harder for women entrepreneurs to get startup funding, as it is also for people of color. And then being an entrepreneur can be exciting, but it also can be isolating. So these are some of the things that I wanted to frame in terms of our discussion of what it means, what transformative resilience means potentially for you. So what is it? Transformative resilience is essentially the notion that we don't just bounce back, that we're not able to go back to where we started, in part because the world that we live in is so fast moving. So by the time something has taken place, on one hand, we've changed, as has our thinking, because we've been through a tough experience and we've had to look at things in a different way, but also the world has changed. So it really is about using adversity as a source of growth and learning, and in essentially integrating the challenges into the people that we become, the entrepreneurs we become, or the leaders we become, and even the organizations, because some of these concepts apply to groups of people and collective mindsets. And there's research that shows, I'm not just pulling this out of a hat. So I guess it was the University of North Carolina has done a number of studies with people who have been through quite severe trauma. So they've been overseas in combat, they may have had a severe accident. And what's interesting is that 60% or more of them have said that despite the fact they wouldn't have chosen that experience, they wouldn't have signed up for it per se, that they actually went through a period of positive growth following it. So if that can happen to people who have had these extremely challenging situations, it can definitely also be true for those of us who deal with the day-to-day stresses and strains, change, challenges, failure, which sometimes is embarrassing or sets us back. But these things are more subtle sometimes. They don't come as one thing. So in terms of my own story, as you heard, it wasn't one thing. It wasn't just the UK visa renewal. It was also the pressure of being a new business owner. It was my father getting hurt. And these things add up to the point where it becomes one particular event or breaking point. But let's move on to some of what makes up transformative resilience and how we build our skills. So continual learning, and this feels appropriate given that we're in a university. Essentially, our brains are built to learn and grow from difficult things. If you think about being a kid and you go into the kitchen and your mom's not around and you stick your hand onto something hot or over a flame, you pull it back, you get burned, it's a bad experience. It's not likely you're going to go and do that again. Your body is hardwired for you to learn so that you don't continue to put yourself in the same difficult situations, and that you can learn to adapt as the environment around you changes. This is true of physical challenges and kind of fight or flight circumstances, but it's also true of the larger, kind of more conceptual learning that we do. So this learning is the basis for adapting to our changing circumstances, as I've said. And what researchers in the UK have found is that when we go through a process of lifelong learning, we are better protected against life's stresses and strains. We're more able to recover from stress and adversity, and we're also able to make meaning out of it. So it doesn't just feel like, hey, why did this cruddy thing happen to me for no reason? Isn't life unfair? You're able to do something with it. And when I say lifelong learning, this could be taking an extension course. It could be being part of a book group and discussing. So it's not just about formal education. It's about continuing to be curious once you're no longer a university student. And then just to say that experts at Harvard, particularly those who work on business and leadership, have pointed out that one of the greatest sources of learning is actually failure. And part of that is because when we succeed, what do? Yes! And then we move on, right? But when we fail, it's like, oh God, why did that happen? You know, what went wrong? And we ponder and we pick it apart and we look at it from different angles. And in doing so, we learn. So again, do you set out going, God, I really hope I'm gonna fail? No, but it happens, and maybe it's a hidden gift. All right, you guys are gonna like this one. I personally wouldn't have any issues with control. I'm entirely easygoing. No, I'm kidding, which is part of why there is a nicely presented PowerPoint here. But control is a challenge for many of us, especially in an increasingly uncertain world. And it's really about finding the right balance. On one hand, being in control is seen as competence in our culture. Some of us have to work harder to be seen as competent than others. So being in control is seen as good. Research coming out of the university here at Berkeley also emphasizes that we have to have some control and ability to influence the basics of our lives, the basic circumstances, to want to engage and make an effort. You know, people who don't have any control over their lives, it's extremely stressful, extremely difficult, and they're not able to think ahead. And I think of people in very, very poor circumstances in different parts of the world that I've spent time with. You know, they can't make decisions about the basics. So the fact that we have some control and influence over those basics is extremely important. And yet, how many times are we kind of trying to grab something that is out of our control? Again, I wouldn't know anything about this. But those of us who end up feeling like we really need to get control often overexert our efforts to get control. And it leads to perfectionism. It often increases our stress because, again, we're trying to grasp something that really isn't tangible or isn't within our sphere of influence. It reduces innovation, which is particularly important for you guys as entrepreneurs because you become rigid. You know, you just think, if I hunker down. But that kind of bolted down thinking means that you can't allow for different things to kind of present themselves and take you in this direction or that direction in ways that might lead to the next big breakthrough for you. And also, it reduces our ability to collaborate, which again is particularly critical for entrepreneurship when you have people that think in different ways coming together. So one of the only things that we can control, and this may not be very satisfying, is our own mindset and the way that we choose to see things. Does it feel catastrophic? Is it the end of the world when something difficult happens? It may be in that moment, but it also may be that something good comes out of it, and we just don't know because it's a matter of what we open ourselves up to. It's a matter of what happens a couple of steps down the road. So that is ultimately where we can focus our control in a successful type of way. So I want to tell you about a really interesting entrepreneur that I've met recently while researching and writing this book. I'm almost tempted to take down the PowerPoint so you guys don't feel the need to read it all. But Frederick Hudson is probably a bit older than you guys by now. He was honorably discharged from, I believe it was the US military, an upstanding citizen. He had grown up quite poor and always been entrepreneuring and trying to find a way to, create a business, make a living. Well, he went astray in these businesses, or, he built a successful business, a mailing business, and then he made a bad choice. And that choice ended him up in prison for 4 years. Talk about lack of control. You don't get to decide when you eat, when you sleep, if you can go outside. All of those basics that we take for granted and are used to deciding for ourselves is entirely taken away. On top of it all, you get told, from what I hear, I've not been to prison, but you get told you're not worth anything, that this is the end of your future, essentially. And Frederick said, I'm not going to buy into that. So I can't control these multitude of things, but what I can control is, and decide, is the kind of person that I want to be. And I can then decide what I'm going to do with my time in here. And that was one of the best decisions that he made, because he spent 4 years essentially creating a self-taught MBA program. And when you talk to this man, oh my God, he's encyclopedic. It's like, oh, and Jim Collins said this about that. And I'm kind of like, oh yeah, what was that name? The man is brilliant. So he went through this process. He came out of prison and he had an idea for a business. While he was in prison, he had noticed that it was really hard for inmates to call home. The cost of calls was exorbitantly high for people who aren't making money. And they also weren't able to kind of keep in touch with loved ones by sharing photos and stuff. So he came out and he said, look, there's obviously a need, a significant need, and there's a business niche here, and now I have experience that I can use to my advantage. But there's also something larger. There's a social contribution. He said, because what I've seen is the guys that get out of here and that have been in touch with their families, they don't come back. And that's a huge social problem that we have. The amount of people incarcerated in this country is, I don't remember the statistics, but when you read it, it's more than half of the industrialized world put together and who they incarcerate. So we've got some challenges, and you don't want people coming back. So Frederick built this business, and part of his ability to let go of control and take risks allowed him to make all of the decisions that led to this business getting started up. He was able to secure $3 million in tech startup. It is an online platform that provides services. And he's now into the growth stages of development. He's been recognized by Forbes, and he is an inspiration for a lot of people, particularly entrepreneurs of color, of which there often aren't a huge number, let alone people with a background, of having been in prison. But what's even more interesting is, when I first talked to him, things sounded like it all went smoothly. And then I had a second conversation with him. And then I followed up with a third, and what I found was actually that they had had quite a big scare not that long ago. And the skills he had previously built helped them get through. So somebody had found a loophole in their online platform and was able to go create hundreds of thousands of fraudulent accounts to make phone calls. And they were making these accounts from Cuba and Japan and wherever else. And the computer didn't allow these people to start making calls, but what it did was start to send out verification calls to verify the accounts. And it couldn't get through to them, so it would call again and again. Well, it racked up a phone bill of, hundreds of thousands of dollars before Frederick and his team realized it. When they realized it, was like, oh, panic, what do we do? Do we just shut down? And Frederick said, okay, we need to buy ourselves time. We're going to temporarily shut down the international services, and then we're going to learn everything that we can. We're going to figure out what we have control over, what we don't, and we're going to go from there. So he brought his team together. He knew that, his limited thinking as the founder with a set number of skills was to say, okay, let's just not do international services. but then they would lose a whole bunch of legitimate business. His team of engineers and other people instead came up with a solution where they would just make it harder to set up these accounts, and the verification calls wouldn't be made unless certain things had already taken place in their system. I won't get into the technicalities of it, but essentially by coming together and learning and drawing on other people's learning, like their phone providers who have dealt with this before, or learning from Skype that have had to deal with some of these problems, they came up with a different kind of solution. But also what happened is that, people had kind of been moaning and groaning about some of the housekeeping in the organization and security and this and that and procedures. It was like, but why do we have to do that? Well, they suddenly got it because there had been this breach. And they start to take more responsibility for the success of the organization so that it wasn't all on Frederick's shoulders for things to succeed. And that was a huge transformation. And I think it's really taken the organization to the next level, the business to the next level. And they actually have had an increase in growth after this incident because they've now improved their services and they're known internationally for being really high quality and reliable. So just an example of how Frederick started, in an out of control situation, a situation you wouldn't really hope for yourself, let alone anybody else. And he really made the most of it and built skills that then translated into building a business, but also averting crisis and knowing how to manage it. And some of this was very much about being actively engaged. So why do I bring this up? Do any of you ever ruminate? Do you know what ruminating is? Hands? Anyone? Anyone want to shout out what it is? Did I hear somebody else was about to?
Mulling over your feelings?
Yeah, but again and again and again. And when you do this, we have to think things through and learn, but if you don't then take action, you get stuck in this cycle, and a cycle that can be quite stressful and quite depressing. So one of the things that we really have to do to build our own skills and be able to transform challenges into something useful for us is to pick and choose our emotions. It's not to say that when something bad happens, you block out and negate all negative emotions, but you kind of give it an expiration date. And you say, okay, this has happened, it's hard, I'm gonna kind of, acknowledge it and then shift some of my attention. It's also a matter of thinking about, do we respond with a knee-jerk, do we react with a knee-jerk kind of response, or do we think things through, take in information and, think about what this might mean long-term? And there's interesting research from mice in laboratories that show when you have mice and you put them in a maze, the cheese at the end, and the mice have to get to the end of it. Well, they start to learn by rote memorization. Or the mice that do learn by rote memorization then have a lot of problems when you change the maze. They can't quite figure out how to get to the end. But the mice that take cues from their environment and adapt and respond do significantly better and get to the end. And I think that we could say holds, our physiology is not exactly the same as mice, obviously, and yet we learn quite a lot from them. So, are we responding? Are we taking in information and are we adapting? And then I feel that before I kind of move on and get you guys asking some questions, we're living in a particularly turbulent time. A lot of the challenges that we face will come from outside ourselves, and they come from structural problems. It could be, the economy, turbulence in the economy, and we've seen more and more of that. Financial crises are increasingly closer together, and our economies are more linked. So, what happens in Japan has a ripple effect over here. Our societies are increasingly divided. This election has shown that, as has Brexit. There's economic inequality. There's a lot going on, and all of these things create turbulence for us. So we have to be able to address that turbulence. And then we have to think about, is our action led by a moral compass and a sense of purpose? And part of that about the sense of purpose is it allows us to make a significant contribution, but it also insulates us from some of the hardship. You know, if you're just plowing through and it's hard and you're trudging uphill and you're like, what is it all for? It makes it much harder to take the next step. But if you feel like, okay, I'm trudging up this hill, but it ultimately leads to, you know, me accomplishing something that I feel is a contribution to the world or something that's important to me, it makes it easier to take those steps. So essentially, do we see crisis? Is something a crisis or is it an opportunity? And how do we use our entrepreneurship for service? So transformative resilience helps us thrive in a turbulent world as individuals and entrepreneurs. But are we using that transformative resilience that we create in ourselves and our entrepreneurship to then go out and create transformative resilience in the world around us so that others benefit from it, but also so that there are less turbulence in the world in the future? You know, do we find opportunities and challenge and also meet widespread needs? So, you know, I can't remember the statistics, but thousands of people around the world still don't have basic services. That presents an opportunity. And many people assume, oh, poor people, you can't sell anything to them. Well, people are proving that wrong quite quickly with things like, you know, prepaid phone services, what have you. So do you make a contribution in that way to a social need? Or do you go with, you know, the tech sexy? Do we need a next Uber that delivers your coffee or your dog food? You know, somebody will be excited about that, I'm sure, and somebody will fund it. From my perspective, it's not what we need at this juncture in time. So let's see, just to wrap up, transformative resilience can help us weather storms as entrepreneurs, leaders, and help us deal with the structural problems. It, you know, can help us give the strength and the interest in digging in and saying, what can we learn from this? That said, you might be going, okay, this all sounds great, but I'm not feeling that strong this week. What am I supposed to do? Wherever we are now, there's always a chance to learn and grow. And that's part of why I started talking about Patti Smith, because when I saw that, I was like, oh, right. People continue to learn and grow. And if I've ever doubted that, that just reminded me by seeing this video. And they learn and grow from difficult things. So wherever we are, we can increase our abilities. And then just to say that there's extensive research, and I find it fascinating. You might want to look it up yourselves. But there's research that shows that our emotions are contagious, and therefore our mindsets. So who you spend time with, who you surround yourself with, matters, but equally, the way that you think about things and that you approach things has a ripple effect for all of those around you. And that includes those that might be a part of your entrepreneurial endeavors, your startup. It could be those in your family. It could be your friends. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to leave you with this quote, which is just, given it's a turbulent time, I thought it was nice. Michelle Obama has said, history has shown us that courage can be contagious and that hope can take on a life of its own. Thank you.
Amma, thank you very much. I am wondering if we have any questions to start off yet. I've got 2 microphones here. Thank you. Thank you for that pointing.
Thank you very much. Amma, thank you so much for your time. I was just curious, what are some of the most important habits you have on a daily basis to maintain that resilience?
For me, walking lately has tended to be a way that I reduce my stress and that I think through things that I'm having trouble with while giving myself an outlet so that I don't create this cycle of just chewing things over and chewing things over. Somehow, if I'm physically moving, it shifts things for me. So I walk with my phone because, like everybody else, I'm obsessed. But also, I have that little notepad in there. So as I'm walking, grappling with something I'm stressed about or a problem, I can also jot down notes. And, you know, a significant portion of the book that I'm now writing has kind of started out in notes as I'm walking. I have started trying meditating. I do not find it easy. I have probably one of the chattiest minds in the world. I'm the daughter of a psychologist, so I can kind of, talk my way out of it. It's like, oh, I know about this. Yeah. But, and it's not a religious thing per se. It's just about coming back to my breath and getting rid of that outside chatter or stress that I've picked up from other people. And I'm increasingly convinced that some of these habits of being able to refocus is the key to my success as well as my future success. Because if you're really stressed out and distracted, you don't have those breakthrough moments that brings you the next idea that's going to take your business to the next level. It's much harder to collaborate with other people if you're on edge and they say something to you and it kind of makes you jump instead of going, oh, well, that's interesting. Could you tell me more? So those are some of the things that I have already been doing for a while and also am encouraging myself to kind of go deeper with.
I'm curious, just to follow up on that, the gentleman who you pointed to, the entrepreneur who has a $3 million company, what did he do? I mean, he had tons of stress at different times.
I don't know if he had some kind of a practice. Some people also have different temperaments and don't get as stressed by things like not having a lack of control. But I think remaking his choice each day, and this is based on my understanding of what he did, reaffirming, okay, I get to decide who I want to be and what that future is going to look like. And I think making decisions in those small things that he then said, okay, so that means today I'm going to the library and I'm going to get this book. I believe that really created some rhythm, some structure, hope, and helped kind of diffuse his sense of stress about not having control and about what the future might look like.
Question, we can go down the row, and then somebody besides the front row has to have questions.
Hey, Alma, thank you. So you described going through a transformative experience where initially you had really huge goals about world development, and subsequent to your transformation, you decided to take a different path. Could you talk about how you dealt with your own perspective about that pivot and how you kept faith with your original values and with your new path?
In some respects, it was agonizing, I'll be honest. For many of us who work on social issues or who have leanings in that direction, a lot of it is an identity. It's not just what you do with your career. So I had started being active in some of these issues when I was like 13 or 14. And I went through first a whole process of how do I feel about this when I left the nonprofit world and the UN world. And then I went through another stage of it as I did this pivot after my back problems. And a lot of it, I guess, came down to refining. My vision did not come together all in one. I'm talking about a period that was probably, condensing a period that probably took a year, maybe two. And I tried things out. And when things didn't feel right, then that gave me information that I could then further pivot with or not pivot if it wasn't right to pivot. But there was quite a bit of challenge in that. And it was also hard because I was pivoting, and a lot of that was internal. My clients of how I was paying the bills had one idea of who I was or who I should be at the same time that I was pivoting. So there was a bit of stretching in two directions somewhat, where part of me still had to be that old self because I had skills and I was well known for certain things, while also building this next iteration of myself. But don't for a minute believe that I've given up on the idea of a social contribution. So in that respect, I don't feel that I've sold out. It's just I'm here talking to you guys about how you might build your skills. And not everybody in this room will have the same kind of calling, but some of you, having heard about my experience or Frederick's experience today, might think, hey, I can be an entrepreneur, and that also could do something for someone else. So I think my feeling is that I've come to realize no one person changes the world on their own. And in that respect, I can make a contribution by building other people's skills and different groups of people than I previously worked with, particularly in this world where businesses are stepping up to say, wow, we really need to know how to deal with all of this turbulence and stress, both in terms of our company and people just being overworked and overstressed and not productive, but also how do we as a company deal with all of this turbulence? You know, Coca-Cola's CEO talks about resilience more than most CEOs I know because Coca-Cola tried to expand into, I think it was China, a bunch of different countries. They couldn't because there was no water. They couldn't get the permits to build plants. So a lot of the issues that I grew up caring about are now front and center as business issues as well as social issues. And the fact that for many of us, each of our success is actually very interlinked to the success of everybody else on the planet as well as the planet itself.
I'll come back to you. Can we do one in the back so we're a little diversity there? Let's go right in the middle, right there. Keep on going.
What traits do you think are most important for company cultures? And also, how do you go about spreading that culture? Like a lot of the transformative resilience, what you talked about is like an individual mindset and perspective. How do you go about spreading that and making sure everyone adopts that kind of mentality?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I believe in a set group of traits, although we have looked at a number of them for our book, and some of them are, I guess, traits or habits, you know, but the continual learning, for instance, the ability to adapt, the ability to find a healthy relationship to control. And again, a lot of this is learned for many people. So it's not like a trait that you're born with and it's fixed and that's, you know, you either have it or you don't. In terms of mindset, I'm glad you asked this question because we actually often have a collective mindset, and that in many respects is what dictates the culture of an organization, although they're closely interlinked and, you know, maybe it's a chicken or an egg. Each person in a group or an organization contributes to that culture, and yet there are key people who will help establish a mindset and therefore a culture more so than others. Leaders are particularly important because people look to them for their cues. So, you know, leaders or being a founder who's then bringing people in to work with you, the way that they approach things is really critical for others. So do they approach things in a way themselves that says, all right, you made a mistake, no big deal. We're going to learn from that and we're going to turn it into something. And through their own thinking and how they treat other people, they bring others along with them. That's significantly different than a founder or an entrepreneur who says, you really screwed it up, you're out, that's never going to happen again. I had a job very early in my career where it was a very technical job. It had a lot of genetics involved, and I was supposed to translate this for the public. Within the first 3 weeks of the job, I was out giving a talk, and I made a technical error. It wasn't the end of the world, but there was somebody on my team who, one, wasn't very collaborative, perhaps a little bit threatened, and they went to our boss and said, she really screwed it up. She can't be trusted. And what it did was, because my boss didn't kind of reframe and say, you know, not the end of the world, let's make sure she knows that in the future. But because my boss went down that path, it created this environment of, oh my God, I can't ever make a mistake or I'll be castigated. So that was an example, unfortunately, of the opposite. And it made it a horrible job for me. It meant that while I did do a good job and I succeeded, I didn't grow, I didn't offer as much as I could have. So just an example from my own personal life about mindset or about, it's really about can you grow from a difficult thing or a mistake? And when leaders set that out in a clear way, then it kind of has a ripple effect for others. Does that answer your question?
I think I'd like to take 2 more questions. If we have 2 more questions. Yep, come back down here, and then we'll end right up there. So where is can you pass the microphone down? Where is the microphone? Hold it up high, pass it on down. And now, because of my short, right there. And then we'll do one up and last in the end.
Thank you. Since leadership, strategy, and transformative resilience are mostly intangible aspects to an organization, how does Marston Consulting measure change and improvements in their clients?
I feel like maybe I should be hiring you to do my metrics. No, I'm just kidding. That is an interesting question. I have measured it based on people's trust in me. So a shift from people coming to me going, we've got this idea all nailed down, we just want you to deliver it, which often when people have come to me with that, they're projects that haven't often been thought through with enough of a bird's eye view or in a strategic enough way. Whereas I have this strategic perspective, so if they come to me earlier on, we can think about, is this project the right project? Is it going to help you reach your goal? So that was a way in which I measured my success. And a transition is when people started to come to me for the more strategic part instead of just trying to get me plugged into something they had already conceived. An increasing number of larger clients, but also different kinds of clients. Because remember that I started out in the social sector, but I now work across, I've worked for Fortune 500 companies, I've worked for FTSE 100 companies, which is in the UK, kind of the top companies. I've worked for the business school at Oxford University, and that has also been a sign of success, is being able to translate some of these ideas to different sectors and think about how the different sectors come up with solutions. So have I gone and done metrics of, an external evaluator? No. I've, in part because we've been a small shop and we've been in a process of pivoting, but those are the ways in which I've measured success. And if you're an expert in metrics, you never know, I could contact you.
We have one more question in the back.
Hello, thank you very much, Amma. So I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I was really interested in your path because you worked in the social sector before. I'm studying development practice here at Berkeley, and I'm also I'm not really sure if I want to stay in the development sector or if I want to do entrepreneurship, because here I'm in Silicon Valley and everything is about creating company and things like that. So I'm just really interested in that, how you transitioned. What made you transition into creating entrepreneurship? And I also have one question about that time where you were overwhelmed with your father and with the job and visas and all of that. When I'm really overwhelmed, I just want to go to sleep. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how you do it. You talked about building skills as well, what kind of skills and other things, more specific things that we can take away. Thank you very much.
Sure. I'm not sure if I understood. Was the first part a comment or a question about going?
It was a question. I just wanted to I wanted you to elaborate on the process of how you made the decision to switch to creating a business.
Okay.
Yeah. Or I don't know if it's too personal, because it might be. I don't know.
It's not too personal per se, although it might be hard to separate out all of it because it's been an iterative process, and many walks around the park with my phone. But I would say, to step back, I increasingly feel that it's not about which sector you're in, it's about what you feel you want to contribute, what your values are, what you have to offer. What's taking place in the world, whether it's politically, environmentally, economically, we need people who are making positive contributions on many fronts. And that can be from the private sector. That can be from entrepreneurs and startups. It can be from nonprofits. But generally, I think it has to come from you and finding what space you feel comfortable in, where you feel recognized. There was a point at which I didn't feel recognized in my work, or like I couldn't make the contributions I felt I had in me because the roles were too narrowly defined, and I was somebody that thought across disciplines, across sectors. So part of what helped me decide was that feeling of being too hemmed in. But again, nobody can answer that for you. It really is about taking the time, and probably over time, to figure out what your passions are, what you think you can contribute, and who will give you the space to do that, or which arena will give you the space to do that. And it might be different arenas at different points in your lifetime.
So when some people feel like just going to sleep, I am curious if you have any things that, I don't know, sure a lot of us here in this room often just like to go to sleep. Not always for a negative reason, but what are some tools that we can, like, if we're walking out here today, what are some things that we can do maybe differently?
Well, for me, I tend to process things with friends. I've told you that I walk because it works for me for whatever reason. I also talk. I talk a lot. Sometimes the people close to me are like, do we have to talk about this again? I'm like, yes, I'm sorry. You love me, right? Can't we just talk about it one more time? Thinking out loud, people who can reflect back to you, that can help get you out of your own way of thinking, but also support you so that it's not like, oh God, I'm about to take a step off the edge of the cliff and there's nobody here with me. Sometimes you need a little bit of distraction, and I think that's okay. Netflix, yeah, talk to me about Sherlock, I don't think that that's bad to give yourself a break and then to come back. And sometimes you have better perspective or better solutions when you've given yourself a rest instead of pushing and pushing and pushing. So, I am also in the process of learning these skills as I research, as I talk to others, as I practice.
I actually think that's a really important point for where many of you all are, whether you're first year or whether you're in grad school. You have so much pressure to keep pushing forward that sometimes in order to get forward, you need to step back and do something totally different. So, and it could be going to sleep, I guess, but realize that sometimes taking a step back will get you further forward. So,
can I just make one last comment? Mm-hmm. And it seems so basic, and sometimes I've spent years kind of going, no, I'm not a California hippie, don't call me that. So when I make comments like this, I kind of go, okay. There is really a lot to be said for kindness. And I don't know about you, but sometimes the least amount of kindness that we have is towards ourselves. So one thing that I try and do is just give myself permission to be where I am. It may be that I'm stuck on a given day and I can't really get ahead. Sometimes I'll say, okay, it's only 4 o'clock, but I'm really stuck, I'm really wound up, I'm just gonna end the day early, and tomorrow, when I feel differently, maybe I'll do a bit extra. But I'm not gonna judge myself, I'm not gonna beat myself up. And I think that is also something helpful to think about in a world where we could use more kindness and where there's a lot of competition and a lot of pressure, that sometimes just kind of being okay with who you are and where you are really has a lot of value. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.